I'm super happy to be here. Jared told you a little bit about our relationship. I definitely want to touch on that. I feel like disclosure and like acknowledgement of biases is important. So I'm biased in favor of Jared and anything that provides an opportunity for us to come together. And Jared and I have known each other for 6 or 7 years. We were, like you all are now, sort of part of the same learning track at Hebrew College, which brought us together. And the thing that I'm most grateful for from my time at Hebrew College is getting to know Jared and 1 or 2 other folks who were part of our program. So that's hard to do in the online format, but it's possible. And our relationship is definitely solidified by the little bits of residency work that we got to do together, and by the fact that we both work in this and are passionate about the same sort of slice of the pie of Jewish education, which is day schools. And so we've had opportunities to get together over the years in that area. If you can't hear me, if you have any questions, anything like that, please feel free to chime in. That's not an interruption. I feel like when adults are talking about anything that's worth talking about, it has to be a conversation in order for it to remain worth talking about. And basically, I thought that I could kind of riff a little bit on the topic of sort of spiritual lives of children, kind of start there and circle back there in a kind of whatever the version of logic is that's built on looking at specific scenarios to kind of figure out what, if anything, we can generalize on the basis of what we see there. But I feel like, it's important to know just a little bit about who I am and where I'm coming from. And so I feel like starting there and kind of getting into some of the theoretical stuff that I'm thinking about and grappling with, because the theory practice connection is something that I know is one of the themes that emerges in any graduate level study, and I saw it somewhere in the extensive syllabus that y'all are working on. And so, we'll get there. I tend to be long with my sentence structure, but hopefully, relatively concise in getting to the point if that's possible. So on the screen is a piece of student work that when I saw it, I just stopped dead in my tracks, and I thought I would just read it and then maybe circle back later, and I can tell you where that and the other pieces that we'll look at came from. I think there's nothing exceptional about this particular piece of student work, except for the fact that when I read it, I just thought, I can't believe what a beautiful piece of writing to come from a 3rd grade child on a Monday morning on a typical school day. So he's got a picture of what is ostensibly himself, a self-portrait, which I love, a pretty good self-portrait. Maybe he's a little big-headed. And he says, the thought bubble says, let's go adventure, indoors or out, be yourself, draw your life with colors, keep on running on. And for me, that phrase in particular, draw your life with colors. But the whole thing, I still get goosebumps when I look at that particular piece of writing. And I'm interested in the human voice and in helping kids find their voices, play with their voices, discover their voices, celebrate their voices. And so this is, when I see something like this come from an activity or a learning experience that I've facilitated or held the space for, I get very, very excited. And to kind of slow the punchline, I've prepared just on the basis of really what I had already kind of scanned into the computer, hundreds of examples of things like this, which I think point to something that hopefully we are all either aware of or very much committed to, which is the fact that human beings have a lot to say. The fact that some of those human beings are 5 or 7 or 9 or 14 years old doesn't mean that they aren't included in that category of human beings who have a lot to say. And maybe even means that some of what they have to say, some of what their voices are able to bring to the world, have a kind of not sort of romantic purity or wisdom to them, but just are really profound in a way that those of us who are sensitive listeners and elicitors of those voices and educators should really figure out how to cultivate. So again, my name is Michael Lapidus. Jared and I met doing our doctoral work at Hebrew College. He ended up doing work, correct me if I'm wrong here, Jared, really focusing on the technology piece in terms of pedagogy, content, knowledge, sort of helping to update an important way of thinking about education that was built on the work of Lee Shulman. My work focused on doing a very qualitative research into early adolescent spirituality because of what I do professionally. So I think also in graduate level classes, there's a funny kind of unstated norm. It's like, we assume everyone did the reading and we assume no one did the reading. And somehow both of those assumptions, though clearly contradictory, can coexist. So in the piece that I had to have Jared,
everyone does their reading though, don't worry.
You and I certainly did. In the piece that I had to have Jared sent to me that I had written because I couldn't locate it, which was embarrassing, there's a little bit of autobiography there, which is basically like Mondays and Thursdays. And Michael, Brad Levenberg will tell you, I'm responsible for leading tefillah at both our lower school and our middle school campuses. Doing that in the middle school context, at times is the most glorious thing in the world, and at other times is like being hazed, like as an adult by middle school students, like for an hour. I mean, it's mortifying. I mean, I might as well be stark naked, and frozen. I mean, it's just terrifying, but not really. But, there's a sense of which, like, you're sitting there, and if you take a moment and step back as a rabbi, as an educator, and you're like, what's going on in this moment? And you start to say, like, well, there are a bunch of students and teachers, and there's someone who seems like he is leading them in something. There's like a guitar there, but like maybe he's using it or not, and they all have these books, but wait a minute, they're in a gym, and they're wearing these school uniforms, and there's like someone shouting at them in Hebrew, and, I mean, like the bird's eye view of what's going on there starts to reveal many, many layers of complexity, some of which are particular to being in the day school setting, like the very formal environment, like the fact that kids are coming from academic classes and going to academic classes, like even the fact that they would be engaged in weekday tefillah on a regular basis, the fact that they are surrounded by educators who have signed onto the mission of a Jewish day school with varying levels of understanding and knowledge in that area, from being, a rabbi to being an Israeli to being someone who is just excited to teach at a place where learning is taken seriously and where the students show kavod, respect to their teachers. So from the kind of awareness that this was a much more complicated episode of practice than I had kind of previously really attended to, emerged the desire to understand, well, what is happening in the spiritual and religious lives of adolescents? And that's a question that I continue to live with. It's a question that led to some research, and it's a question that led to one piece of literature in particular, which if you take a close look at the readings, you would have seen multiple times, the work of Hay and Nye, entitled The Spiritual Lives of Children, which seems to be also the kind of taught in the name of this particular week of study. And then I started to think, well, what are they bringing into this space? What are they learning? Where are they learning it? Who are they learning it from? What are we trying to teach? What's being learned? Who are the teachers? Is there any consensus around, if you ask those people, what is tefillah? What are the goals of tefillah? Is there any common discourse, even knowing that all of the people pretty much who were kind of officially and explicitly charged with this task were people that I had vetted and onboarded, to use a totally inappropriate term for the Jewish community, and like brought to be a part of the Davis Academy just by virtue of having been there for 9 years, and let alone all the other people in the room and the implicit messages that kids are receiving about tefillah, and all sorts of questions were starting to populate my mind, and then the question of, well, how would we ever make any progress on these topics? Many of these questions do have not answers, but they have responses. So you say, well, is there any consensus around, among the adults in the room about what tefillah is? There are probably a couple different primary viewpoints. and I could tell you what those are, but like, where do they come from? How do they inform the different kinds of models of prayer leadership, of Shaliach Tzibur that the kids see? How do they inform? Forget about the syllabi or the explicit curriculum that's taking place in classes. How do they inform the kind of rants and the kind of, what's the word that I'm looking for? The kind of teachers talking about what tefillah means to them in ways that can influence students that are completely editorial. Edit is the word that I was looking for. Hi, Alicia, glad you could join us. So I'm the rabbi at this school. It's a Reformed Jewish day school. There are about 600 kids there. That number has ebbed and flowed slightly over the years. There are two campuses, which is interesting. There's a lower school campus and there's a middle school campus. I'm the director of Jewish and Hebrew Studies. I lead, theoretically, the faculty in those departments, and the curriculum in those departments. I oversee those instructional times, alongside tefillah, which happens on Mondays and Thursdays and Fridays on both of our campuses in many ways, shapes, and forms over the years, most of them with, relative degrees of success. And also the holiday programming. If there's any explicitly Jewishly themed parent education that takes place at Davis Academy, that's under my direction. If there's any professional development for the general studies faculty, because we do have a dichotomy, people work very nicely together, that's under my direction. So at the end of the day, like, the person who's thinking the most consistently, longitudinally, or whatever the over the years about Jewish life and the spiritual lives of the kids at the Davis Academy at this point is me. That wasn't always the case, but entering my 9th year, now that is the case. So that's more or less where I'm coming from. And for anyone who works in the day school world, but also any of us, without the luxury of being able to resolve or achieve clarity on some of these questions between the Monday morning tefillah and the Thursday morning tefillah, right? I mean, to put it as starkly as possible. So I think that's me, that's my role at Davis. And then just my own Jewish journey. Having grown up in the Reformed community, not having had necessarily any systematic socialization into Jewish prayer or any other spiritual tradition necessarily. I was raised with a moral compass, and I was raised with ethics, and I was raised to be thoughtful and reflective, but no one ever said to me, that's tefillah, or that's a spiritual practice. So not operating with a very strong mental image from my own upbringing, which is, again, something we can ask ourselves about our own as we enter into the fraught and interesting work of teaching tefillah. But also pretty firmly committed to the idea that Judaism is an ancient tradition, it's an ancient wisdom tradition. There must be compelling reasons why the kind of spiritual prayer aesthetic of Judaism developed the way that it did. It's as ancient as yoga, it's as ancient as meditation, and so there's got to be something in our tefillah tradition that commands or captivates the human imagination and the human spirit, because it's an ancient and obviously viable tradition. So trying to figure out what that was, even as I wish that Jewish prayer looked maybe more like yoga or something that allowed me to be in a little better shape. So, all of that. So if you were to ask me what's the tefillah at the Davis Academy, kind of what are we trying to do? I think I would be inclined to think in terms of religious goals, and I'm really working this out, actually only just now talking to you, but I did try to think about this other time. Religious goals, spiritual goals, and goals in the realm of religiosity. And maybe those can be frameworks that we can use to kind of think critically about what we're doing more generally. So on the religious side of things, I want kids to know the prayers. I want them to be able to go and be successful in their bar or bat mitzvah. I want them to know where to find Havdalah in the store and understand what I'm getting at. I mean, people have expectations of a day school kid. Are they realistic? I'm not sure, but they have to do with kind of ability to function in the religious milieus of the Jewish communities that they experience at Davis and beyond. On the spiritual side of things, I really like the idea that lehit palel is a reflexive verb that I believe, and if not, I want to believe, and if I'm wrong, I don't care, that it has something to do with being in judgment or being in dialogue with oneself, so that there's a reflective process that's meant to take place in tefillah, connecting to one's voice, to one's aspirations, to one's hopes and dreams and strengths and weaknesses and sense of the divine and all of those things. That's the side of the equation that I'm more interested in. And I think in order to access that, we can't only ask kids to read the tradition, we have to ask them, we have to allow them to write the tradition, which comes back to the piece of writing on the screen and some of the work that I'm now realizing is not a unique signature of my rabbinate, but is something that I feel very strongly about. And on the religiosity side of things, which to me, and I think I learned this from Michael Shire, who is an instructor at Hebrew College, I'm sure you know, like Jared.
He's the dean now.
But British, what? He's the dean, okay. So that religiosity is where does the spiritual and the religious kind of kiss? And so I would love the idea that when we take our 8th graders to Israel and they're at the Kotel and they say the Shema, there's a tremendous sense of feeling that exists there for them. And you can't say it's purely spiritual. You can't say that it's purely religious. You can say that somehow they have figured out a way to access authentic spiritual meaning in the context of their religious tradition. And that would be religiosity, sort of as I understand it. But if you were to ask a kid at Davis, what's tefillah? I've tried to ask them this. It's interesting. I don't think they would even know that the Kabbalat Shabbat service that we have on Friday, which looks and feels very different from the Monday and Thursday tefillot that we typically have, is tefillah. Just like if you ask them what their favorite holiday is, they never say Shabbat because they don't realize Shabbat's a holiday, but that's a separate topic. I don't know if they would be able to articulate that the creative writing that I've been doing with them over the years, and particularly in the last year, is, at least according to me, tefillah, and we'll get to that in a moment. So, but I'm also not sure that we need, on the one hand, a part of me really wants kids to be able to label and understand what it is that so that they can better understand what they're being taught. Like, oh, this activity where I am being asked to share my thoughts about draw your life with colors is tefillah. So that way they can carry any positive feelings or the learning that they've done there with them when they enter another space that has that same title in their mind, tefillah, right? Like a tag on an article or like a category on a blog or something like that. That they would understand that these things, that all of these different things, singing with a guitar in the outdoor sanctuary, learning how to light the Shabbat candles, and being asked to share your thoughts in writing are tefillah. But I'm not. To kind of close the loop on that, I'm not sure that that it's reasonable to expect a 2nd or a 3rd grader or a 5th grader or an 8th grader to be able to take a step back from the experience, the learning experience that they're having, and then to be able to say, and this is what this learning experience is called, and this is how it connects to all the others. Just like someone recently and I were chatting about, well, what do you hope for your graduates? And what do you want your graduates to know or say or feel or do? And I realized I don't think it's realistic for a child whose only educational experience for 9 or 10 years has been in the context of a Jewish day school to be able to appreciate or even begin to appreciate what has happened to them and through them and what in that particular environment until they've had an opportunity to grow and see other ways of doing things and realize that the choices that were made for them by their parents and by their community were kind of qualitatively different from many of the peers that they will acquire as they go through life. So I often wonder about, I just had a chance to visit with a Jewish studies director colleague who works at a school that starts in middle school and goes through high school in the Philadelphia area. And we were chatting about tefillah, and a part of me wondered if we were talking about the same, if the operational definition of tefillah is the same. I think was comforting for me that in the end it is the same. Like, I don't think there's anything that's so radical about tefillah at the Davis Academy that it doesn't look like tefillah would look like at a Schechter school, at a supplementary school, at a Jewish summer camp. I mean, I think there's a general kind of aesthetic and consensus around what tefillah looks like. But I think Davis has some interesting challenges that come with the day school, that come with being a Reform day school, come with being in Atlanta, Georgia, that come with doing the work that we do, and some opportunities because I have encountered such goodwill, such open minds, and such willingness from the various stakeholders in this community to let tefillah be whatever we want it to be, whether it's purely communal, joyful experience together, or whether it's focused entirely on the spiritual side of the equation, or whether it's focused on the purely religious side of the equation. I mean, we can, and our kids seem very happy to navigate those environments. They know sometimes they're going to be asked to record their prayer reading into a microphone so their Hebrew teacher can check to make sure they're saying the words correctly, and they know sometimes they're going to be with me doing creative writing, and sometimes they're going to be whatever, doing art. I mean, you know, different modalities. So any questions up to this point before I attempt to describe, I think, some of the exciting initiatives of the last year or two? Or comments? Jared, is this helpful? Is this coherent?
Yeah, it looks like Stephanie's got a question.
Oh, good.
So would you say that sort of what you define as religious goals is more keva, and what you define as spiritual goals is more kavanah? I mean, would you divide it that way?
That's an interesting way to think about it. I think that works in this context. Yeah, as long as we're able to together celebrate the inextricable bond between the two, right? So I think in my own upbringing, I'm quick to prioritize keva over kavanah over keva in this scenario, the spiritual over the religious. But I also know that you and I, right, and others who are serious about Jewish education are interested in the religious piece and understand that the religious piece is the gateway to being able to access the kind of, if there's anything unique about Judaism at all, passing through the gates of sort of religious learning is an essential series of steps in order to get there. Right, like some knowledge of the Hebrew language and some knowledge of the way that a Siddur works and the way that the Jews look at time and things like that. And so I think in the religious side of Judaism, there is a lot of kavanah because we can see the love and care and passion that were put into constructing this incredible apparatus of keva. But yeah, I think that makes sense to me.
I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I
Yeah.
know that before I started at Hebrew College a year ago, I was really stuck on the keva, right? I mean, I thought it was really, my bar mitzvah kids had a list of 33 prayers they needed to know, plus their Torah portion and their Haftorah portion, and you know, I mean, it was very much in the concrete. And I didn't spend much time with them working on the kavanah piece. And now, in reflection, after I've been studying education for a year, it's totally different, right? I see it very differently.
Yeah, it's interesting that, I mean, the pressure that we all feel, because to some extent, and our rabbinic colleagues and our parents are complicit in this. They don't care about, they're not as quick to see the value of the things that I now find myself really valuing if when they encounter a kid who has been a member of their synagogue but has opted out of religious school because they've been at Davis Academy, and that kid shows up and can't fluently read Aleinu, they say, well, what the hell have you been doing this whole time? And you say, well, we've been doing this. And they say, well, you should be able to do that and this. And parents, when I share student writing and other examples that show kind of the inner world, the spiritual life of their children, are so, I mean, you know, that's the stuff that moves you to tears or makes you so excited or makes you laugh or makes you wonder, where did this being come from? But the anxious part of us wants to make sure that our kids have that capacity to be in a religious environment. But I get that, because I think that part of, you know, kind of informing all of this is that question of authenticity. And if you are capable of deriving tremendous meaning from Jewish tradition, but you're not able to kind of navigate that tradition in a way that's consistent with your age and your education, then one wonders, like, well, who gave you the keys to this? And who gives you the permission to fly, like, if you can't walk, you know, sort of thing. Yeah. Other people have thoughts about this? Yeah. What, Jared?
Oh, I was just going to suggest, do you want to show some of those examples that you prepared that do capture some of that inner working of the kids and the work?
Great, let's do it. Perfect. So this is fun to me. I could do this forever. Here's what I would say. There's a tremendous goodwill for how we do Tefillah Davis. There's a unique opportunity to do this with kids from the youngest age in a way that is completely affirmed and normal within the context of their school environment. And the rabbis there, I mean, everything, there are the challenges that I mentioned before, but there's also tremendous goodwill. I had a really interesting conversation with a teacher, and then we'll go right to these, who was taught at Davis, left to go to Pardes to do his master's, taught in another Jewish day school, and came back. And I said to him, this was his first year back, what do you think, like, what's it like? Is Davis like every other school, this or that? And he's like, I love my other school that I worked at. I love where I did my student teaching. He said, but Davis is different. He said, I think it's the kids. He said, I've never met kids who had such belief in God. And that really struck me. I mean, I have faith, I have belief in a very peculiar Capellanian sort of odd God, you know, who kind of allows life to be beautiful and meaningful and purposeful and commands us to do things. But I had never really thought about the fact that Davis Academy students had a certain kind of Hasidic sort of impulse with them. But then I thought, well, if there's one priority that I have tried, and again, I'm completely not responsible for that, but if there's something that I've tried to do over the years consistently, it's to kind of fulfill the notion that God and other abstract concepts are what we make of them. And if we give kids the opportunity to talk about and explore those matters of the spirit without judgment and in creative, developmentally appropriate ways, then they will have a richness of language in those areas where many other people in the world don't. And if only more kind of people like the kids at Davis had a depth of language about spiritual matters, the world would be a better place, because we all know that religion, unfortunately, in the public sphere at least, largely remains the special domain of assholes, you know, for lack of a better word. So I realized, like, I love the idea that our kids who are perfectly normal, right, they're not all going to be rabbis, they're not all going to be grad students in Jewish education, they're just normal people, but that they have been given a chance to explore matters of the spirit. So I want them to, so let's look at what we have here. So we come back to this lovely, let's go adventure. So what's the thought bubble that we're looking at, and of which there are many more examples? Part of what we did this year, we said we're going to pick 4 prayers, and we're going to have some of our different qualified instructors teach these prayers in different modalities. I said my modality is creative writing. I think part of my authenticity is I love to write, and so I want other kids to love to write. I realize that writing favors certain kinds of kids. I also realize that the idea of uncovering one's voice is a certain kind of metaphor, right? Like, what if what if you don't have a voice in the traditional sense? But I realized this is something that I can authentically do. I can authentically come up with ways to kind of get kids writing and help them discover their voice in this particular way. So one of the prayers was Elohai Neshama, which is a prayer for the soul. And the way that these lessons basically went would be once a week for about 20, 25 minutes in the morning. I gathered with the grade level. They all knew that they had to bring their paper and pens. They had to write their full name at the top of the sheet, so that way I could come up and tell them I love what you wrote. And then I would try to find a topic that I was interested in that I thought would speak to the kids that just came from the prayer. I mean, it's the most common sense idea to me. And so for Elohai Neshama, basically all I said to these kids, I said, it's a prayer. It's called Elohai Neshama. It's about our soul. I riffed a little bit. You know, we've got, some people say we've got a body and we got a soul, and it's kind of like the two parts of us. And like the body is like this thing that, you know, we use to like run around in. And the soul, I don't know what it is. I'm not sure you can see it. You can't see it. Maybe it's that other part. And maybe, if you listen carefully, our soul is speaking to us. And so why don't you guys try that? Why don't we be quiet? We'll go outside, we'll do some listening, and then we'll come back and you'll write down, did your soul try to whisper to give you a message today? And by the way, if you couldn't hear your soul, it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean you don't have a soul. You know, if you don't hear anything, then write about that, right? Like I really tried to leave it as open as possible. And so this was one of the responses. Let's go adventure, indoors or out, be yourself, draw your life with colors, keep on running on. And let's look at a few more from third graders. So this one starts with what the child heard while outside, and then at the bottom, my soul is singing to be nice, generous, helpful, kind, sweet, and to be a sharer. She tells me to have a smile on my face wherever I am in life. My soul tells me to be me. Sometimes I am not the real me. My soul is very kind. I mean, there's so much there to explore. And I cannot think of a more beautiful Elohai Neshama than these. And one thing to kind of circle back to the readings and the theory, this idea of the personal signature, that we may have some general, Alicia, you asked about the kind of biological possibility that spirituality is sort of part of our biology, which I think is, we don't need that, but it seems like there's something very primary about spiritual experience, however we define it, right? Like it affects us, it has the potential to affect us viscerally, like it's in there. And so part of what we need to do is bring it out. But along with that is still the idea that, but we all have it in our own way. And so I just think that these illustrations that all came on the same, by the way, random Monday morning, third graders, you know, this is not, again, the spiritual elite and the kind of unique ways in which they responded to this and other assignments. So my soul told me to always be kind to everyone. I only hear my soul in a quiet space when I talk to God. And I think fundamentally educators are optimists, so hopefully we can just be nourished by some of these things. My soul is telling me to help others who are homeless and less fortunate than us all the ways possible by giving food, clothes, a job, and plenty more. I'm looking for some that maybe are a little bit different. My soul is saying always be kind and treat others the way you want to be treated. Be kind to all you meet because they are fighting a war you know nothing about. That is a moral I have learned. I love that. I mean, I can tell you a little bit about this child who is witnessing her parents experience a divorce. So I also think, like, what an important thing for this child to be able to do at the school in this space. My soul, telling me to be a good student, not to worry, follow your dreams, don't let people take you down, be kind and respectful, be yourself, do the right thing, not the wrong thing. And really, you can just look at these. I mean, I think about the pedagogic implications of these, like printing off all of these copies, handing them to a classroom full of Jewish educators and saying, feel free to go shopping and try to, if you don't like the one you have, try to trade it for one you like more. And in the process, kind of celebrate these voices. I'm just kind of scrolling through to see if there's anything else. I don't know what my soul is saying to me because it doesn't have the mouth to talk, but I know it's trying to. Sometimes I can hear my soul asking me, did I do something nice today? A lot of concern about the interpersonal. My soul speaks to me in dreams or nightmares. My soul speaks to me when I eat a cookie and happiness. This one's a little hard to read. But this is a kid who has so much to say and doesn't have the fine motor skills to always say it. I'm just looking for anything that really, I love this soul message. I can hear my heart beating a little. My soul is asking why my great-grandma died a couple of months ago. My soul is sad but happy. My mind has to be clear in order to hear it better. My soul says, always believe in yourself. And one of the things I always tell them, don't worry about grammar, don't worry about spelling, don't worry about punctuation, don't worry about if it makes sense or not. You know, just feel free to let your pen speak. You guys cool if we look at a few more and maybe move to a different topic?
Mm-hmm.
I love this. So just a similar example. And I mean, the pedagogy is so simple. I'll show you that star, the prayer that we say for the body. I love that there's a prayer that you say when you go poop. But by the way, think of all the things you love. How many of those require a body? So maybe write a thank you note to your body or to God or to something like that. But I just think the body awareness here is delightful. Thank you for letting me walk in nature. Thank you for letting me listen to my favorite song. Ashrei, you helped me do the right thing to do. You have let me do great things. Thanks again. You see there's at least a few. Look at this piece of art that this third grader drew. He's such a sweet artist. Thank you for letting me do things that keep me healthy and happy, like eating fruits and veggies. Thank you for letting me pet my puppy, Daisy, and thank you for letting me keep her healthy and happy too. And the amount of information we're getting from the kids, I love this self-portrait. Thank you for letting me take a dump, eat, drink, play sports, play basketball, music, guitar, drums, learning, being able to be with my friends, sleep, letting me go to the Davis Academy sincerely. So we got to see the picture. But his parents, I had to call them and read this to them. And they thought they were dying with laughter because obviously that's what it's called in their house. Maybe just one or two more. Dear body, thank you for allowing my soul to be free. If I didn't have you, I wouldn't be able to do anything I love to do. Singing, dancing, playing, talking, sleeping, eating, writing, these are all things I've discovered I love to do, and without you, I wouldn't be capable of doing. I hope you know how important you are with love. And so maybe just look at...
Mike, can I ask a question?
Yeah, and then we'll jump to middle school. Go for it.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the different examples of thinking of the body and thinking of the soul. I mean, it just seems really interesting to give the kids that opportunity to think of them as distinct, the thank you to my body for all these things, and then listen to my soul. Did you ever do anything where they sort of put those pieces together? Like, here's my body, the letter to my body, the letter to my soul, somehow that makes up who they are,
Not necessarily, but the nice thing, Jared, is that the idea of using tefillot for creative writing is a never-ending process. You can have a million themes from Shacharit, right? Even before you get to Baruch Hu. I mean, you have endless. And also, you could do the same thing, and you could do it with them when they're in 4th grade, and when they're in 7th grade, and when they're in 8th grade. And you can see, I mean, and also I think just the idea of accustoming kids to the idea that tefillah is the place where they're able to kind of explore matters of great significance in ways that require them and allow them to use their voice. And then always I meant to say at the end of this, it isn't just turning your papers. It's like, does anybody want to share? You don't have to share. If there are 70 kids in a grade, which in our biggest grade there are, 50 hands go up. And the kids who don't get to share are devastated. And I say, don't worry, I'm going to read everything you wrote. And the kids who do share, some of them, you see in their teacher's eyes, I can't believe this child is speaking right now. I can't believe this kid said that. I mean, you can see the jaw dropping that's happening among the adults. And it's just a lot of fun. So middle school, because I think for some of us, this is the peculiar animal, and it kind of comes back to the precipitating crisis that led me to want to be a more reflective practitioner. So on one day in middle school, where it's a little harder to get them to have the apparatus to get them to do the writing, I took 4 prayers. I said, Modani, Elohai Neshama, Modani, thank you for waking up, Elohai Neshama, the same prayer for the soul, Devarim, which is a list of mitzvot, and I introduced this, the idea that every day has a psalm associated with it. So Monday has a psalm, and Thursday has a psalm, and just that whole idea. And what are psalms? Place where human beings expressed all of their different emotions and thoughts and feelings. So these are not always, so these are some of their varied responses. And I had hundreds of just different beautiful things. Love your neighbor as yourselves. Love every creation God has put on this earth. Love God. Question, it's important. Question what comes. Be curious. Curiosity is a strength. But sometimes, only sometimes, we must learn to accept the beauty of life. Leave beauty alone, but cherish it. Questioning can hurt, but it also can heal. And by the way, the same instructions. Don't worry about grammar. Don't worry about spelling. Don't worry about meaning. Does anybody want to share? No requirement, only an invitation. Monday is a day of learning. After a long, fun weekend, we finally have a chance to feel our brain. Thank you for giving us a day to learn. Roses are red, violets are blue. I love to feel that. How about you? That's very sweet. Wake up and be happy. Be yourself. Don't let anybody change you. Sometimes I don't enjoy Monday morning, but I always try to remember that I have a place in the world, and without one person, everything will be destroyed. So I must take action in the circle of life. This could be a 6th grader. It could be an 8th grader. God loves me and cares about me, and I do the same in return. I'm protected and I'm safe when I come in contact with God. Thank you for all the things I have. And literally this one day, I wouldn't say that my faith was gone, but it's so deeply restored and affirmed my sense that, you know what, there's so much happening in these kids' lives. If we expect it to be on the surface, which is where they're developing their breasts and their acne, then we're going to be perpetually disappointed. If we're willing to entertain the idea that it's happening inside and that they're not sure yet how they feel about it, and so they're not going to like flaunt it in front of us in the same way that we might expect them to kind of demonstrate their learning, then there's something going on. You can always do better. You hopefully have read that one while I did this. I'm looking for some of the special ones. Some of them, you know, one of the questions is religious language artificial? Is it authentic? So Hay and Nye, when they did their work, and Alicia, you asked a question about relational consciousness, they said sometimes kids would talk about religious things, but it was clear that they were just doing that because they thought they were supposed to, right? So you can always wonder, like clearly working in a religious environment, but you know, no one told this kid that, this kid had no realization that he had basically paraphrased like probably the most generic refrain in the book of Psalms. I want to look for death doesn't, I love this, death doesn't discriminate between the sinners and saints. It just takes and it takes and it takes and it takes, and we keep fighting anyway. We rise and we fall and we break and we make our mistakes and we keep fighting anyway. Let's find one more really great one. This is a great one, but let's keep looking. And then maybe if there are questions or comments. I'm grateful for a clean palate, a place to grow, improve, learn, and seek to understand. I'm grateful that I'm able to see my mistakes and to build who I am from them. I love this last line, the invisible creator pushing me forwards. So it's almost embarrassing to come to a group of, you know, well-educated professional adults and bring this to the table. It just feels so obvious to me. And yet I suspect that to some extent it's lacking in the Jewish community. And I now have this reservoir of hundreds of pages of beautiful writing that I can just turn to nourish myself, to deepen my own understanding, and to say, like, this is probably the main recurring theme of my rabbinate. Like, unlike this webinar where I do most of the talking, it's to elicit the voices from others. And if someone asks me, you have 45 minutes to spend in a tefillah activity, you only get one chance to do this, as the last tefillah you're ever going to teach, I would definitely turn towards something like this, where I could try to just get one more chance to help one person take one, you know, add one sentence or one phrase to their own voice in these areas. Ideally in relation to Jewish tradition, in relation to the Siddur, because that's the environment that I'm working in, and I think there are opportunities there, but I come down pretty heavily on the side that children have spiritual lives, we all do, but that we have to work at it. I mean, I'm not going to be, you know, running a triathlon without working at it, and I'm not going to be able to live a meaningful spiritual life without working at it either. And teaching tefillah isn't always, you know, as we discussed a little while ago, and Stephanie, as you kind of brought up, isn't always calibrated toward that work. So what does it mean to know a prayer? I think those kids are closer to knowing Asher Yatzar and Elohai Neshama than they would be if they didn't have these experiences and have these opportunities. So I think I will formally end there. But if people have strong reactions or questions or comments or want to hook back into any of the readings or, I would love to talk less. Michael.
I have some questions. Yeah. So how long have you been doing the creative writing activities? Like how many years?
On and off for the entire 8 full years I've been in Davis, but systematically for 1 year and only with our lower school.
Okay, because I'm interested in like any observations you've had about like long-term impact. Like if they've gotten used to doing this, have you seen like an increased ability to be expressive like at the end of the year after doing it for the full year? And like what kind of developments do you want to see year to year? Like if they started in elementary school doing this activity and they get used to doing it all the way through middle school, what do you want to really be able to see when they get to 6th or 7th grade with their ability to express themselves this way?
Yeah, I definitely have aspirations in that area. I think you probably would be able to answer that question on my behalf because I think we would say the same thing. I mean, kind of the ability to look back and say, you know what, like, first of all, I remember that, or that was me, or I know that I was capable of producing that, or that that's a sentiment that authentically exists within me, or after I wrote that, I started to think about it and ask myself, did I really believe it? Or, or I feel, or just see it, to cultivate the ability to reflect. So I think I would not necessarily expect to see a deepening, and I will track these over the years because these kids will be in 4th grade and in 5th grade. They won't be writing on the same topics, but they'll be writing on others. I would like to be able to see some coherent voice emerging, but I also anticipate that it would be in fits and starts, and that a coherent voice could still have tensions and contradictions and could, through various life experiences, go from kind of tremendous faith to tremendous doubt and back again. And so, I think the willingness to stay in conversation with oneself and the ability to kind of recognize that that conversation is happening. Like, I don't think that a typical 5th or 7th or 8th grader would say, I am in dialogue with myself, kind of cultivating my voice about matters of sort of spiritual, religious, and existential concern. But I'd love for them to be able to say, like, I've done a lot of creative writing and a lot of exploration of this over the years, and I enjoy it because it excites me to think about what I really think about these things that other people have been thinking about for as long as people have been able to think, maybe something like that. But I do think there's tremendous potential. I think every year our school could publish our own Siddur. I mean, I think there's so much opportunity to do things to celebrate these voices. So I don't know if that's satisfying, but I think it's a great question to ask.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question, actually.
Yeah, who is that?
This is Alicia.
Hey, and you submitted yours 1 or 2 ahead of time, but you can ask one that you didn't even submit.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I have another one, actually.
Great.
So I know that your experience has been in a day school. Do you have any advice for how your approach carries over to a Hebrew school setting where there's many more time constraints as to what you can do with the kids? How do you help them create that kind of practice when they you only get them for a couple hours a week? How does that differ?
Yeah, I have definite thoughts, and just to recognize that all of our venues have such complicating factors. So I think on the plus side from the religious school setting, you get the opportunity, ideally, to be really upfront and say, we're about religion here. Like, you're coming here to study your Jewish religion, tradition, culture, heritage, faith. Like, at a day school, there's a lot of pressure to be athletically competitive and to have a great theater program and a fine arts program. And, like, there are a lot of things that you have to do to justify the tremendous value proposition of a day school. So in a religious school setting, kids are coming there, whether they like it or not, to learn about their religion and their faith. To me, it comes back to a consent, just get stakeholder buy-in. So Stephanie, kind of said, like, raised the question of what does it mean to know a prayer? And if what it means to know a prayer is that at some point you have been forced to interact with it in a creative writing or an artistic sort of way, I would be so happy to know that the religious school that I would send my child to, the director of education, the parents, other people had said, yes, this is important. And even if it meant one prayer that at every bar or bat mitzvah, instead of being recited in Hebrew, was the prayer of that kid's choice, whether it was the Shema or the Amidah or Birkat HaShachar, was their own creative version. Like, I think there are ways to weave a little bit of this into a religious school environment, but it would have to need to be on the checklist of, like, we have limited time. They need to know this stuff. What does it mean to know this stuff? Mm-hmm. You know, it means to have been forced to reflect on it and to use it as an occasion to interact with your own voice. Mm-hmm. So that would need to be the goal. And then say to parents, like, part of the bar mitzvah checklist is like, we're going to give your kid a chance with we're going to have 3 or 4 occasions where we're going to let them do these creative writing activities, and one of them is working its way into your child's bar mitzvah service, and it's going to be beautiful. And that's what it means to know a prayer at our congregation. Because these are all, you know, these are 20-minute activities, which is a lot of time, particularly if you don't have a lot of time. But I'm sure whoever is leading tefillah at, you know, 4:40 from 4:45 to 5:15 would be happy to say, everyone stay in their classrooms today, take out a piece of paper and a pen, here's a topic, you know, just start writing. Mm-hmm. That would potentially decrease the amount of pain and suffering in the world.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Sure. Is that at all viable? I don't know enough about the religious school setting at this point.
Yeah, no, that was helpful. Thank you. Just kind of jumping off of that, how have you found that the different grade levels are able to tolerate extended periods of creative writing? For example, for lower elementary, how much writing do you find is useful? What is the chunk of time that you find they're able to focus and get something out of it?
I've only done these in 20 to 22 minute increments. Mm-hmm. That feels a touch rushed for me because mm-hmm. the actual pen to paper part is I always budget 4 or 5 minutes mm-hmm. unless I'm working. I don't do this with kindergarten, and I've started this in first grade. And invariably, with the exception of first grade, you say, who needs more time? The majority of hands go up. So at least at Davis Academy, when kids are asked to do creative writing, if you have done it right, it's in their zone of proximal development or whatever, right? I mean, some of them are just going to start writing and they're going to fill up the front and back of a page. Some of them need to think before they start writing. And I always say to them, and feel free to draw a picture. I don't favor the visual arts. You know, I love visual arts, but that's not my strong suit. I'm not such a great critical reader of visual art as I think I am of creative writing, but I always say, and draw a picture if you want. You know, I say the main thing is write on your paper and your paper only. When you're done, put down your pencil and just don't disturb your neighbor. And I've found that the ones who can't hang even for 4 or 5 minutes of creative writing generally always appreciate a moment to just chill out and be quiet. Mm-hmm. So for the most part, if we've created a relaxed environment that's conducive, I'd say that these activities, I would put 2 or 3 more minutes into my setup. I'd love to not have to always rush them in their writing, and I'd love to have maybe an extra 2 or 3 more minutes for sharing at the end. So I would love a 35-minute chunk of time mm-hmm. because I'd also love to start with a song, you know, to kind of, right now when I'm doing this, in the context I'm doing it, it's all business. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I've had some similar experiences, and what I found with like early to mid elementary, sometimes it's great to step back and let them sort of teach one another, because the ones who are more comfortable doing the writing are more than happy a lot of times to help other kids. Say, like, when a kid's like, well, I don't know what to write, they'll say, well, why don't you try this, this, and this? And you can step mm-hmm. back and let them sort of talk through the process of expressing themselves without you having to intervene and sort of hang over their shoulder and say, why don't you try this? It's I think it has that collaborative element that can be really productive.
I love that. And I also try to provide some element of choice and to have at least, you know, topic and variation. So listen to your soul, and if you can't hear your soul, write about that. Or write a thank you note to God for your body, or write a thank you note for your body, or make a list of all of your favorite things to do. So that way a kid who, I get some blank pages and things, you know, like that. But for the most part, I love what you're saying. You know, I think that's important. And kids are can be very generous with one another. In this scenario, most of the kind of peer modeling and teaching comes when kids are sharing, and someone says, "Oh, wow, that's what you wrote. You know, I could have done that." Or I often will say after a kid wrote, I'll say, "Ask yourself, did you write something that's just like that, or was there something that they just said that surprised you? You know, or if you were to write it over again, you know, how would you write differently now that somebody shared that?" Just to give kids a chance to kind of be asking those questions of one another, because they also don't always know how to teach one another or how to learn from one another or be inspired from one another. But that certainly is a beautiful way of thinking about advancing a learning community.
I have a question. When you're planning out for the school year, your creative writing, what are some like big ideas or enduring understandings that you focus on to help you when you are designing your curriculum? In other words, what is it that you want your students, you know, to come away with? And, you know, that would help me in order to be able to teach Tefillah, is to know, you know, what are some big ideas or what are some enduring understandings. I understand what kinds of learning activities that you have, but, you know, overall as a rabbi, you know, what is it that you want the students to come away with, you know, spiritually or in the religious realm?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. That document doesn't necessarily exist right now, and I think that's you're asking the right question. I think there's a kind of an undocumented vision of tefillah that's happening here, that which the people who are leading and facilitating these experiences more or less share and would articulate in their own way. So we're a small enough team, the 5 or 6 of us who are implementing this, that you know, we all agree that we are using a portion of our tefillah time to help kids uncover the meaning, the relevance, the insights, the opportunities that exist in these prayers, and knowing that fluency and things like that will come as they get better at their Hebrew decoding and as they spend more time in synagogue and things like that. But for now, we want to cultivate prayerfulness and spirituality and religiosity within these kids. The way that I say that is I want them to have an opportunity to develop and explore their spiritual and religious voices. So that's the way, if I had to say it in one way. But just really quickly, first we did this, we took as a theme, we said our theme is God. And so I did 4 different creative writing sessions on God. Then we said our theme, we've got all these different prayers we want to learn, let's pick 4 prayers. Now next year we're going to dedicate the whole year to focusing on the Shema rubric of the service. So Baruch Hu and Shema and Ve'ahavta and Nichamocha, and the creative writing topics for me are going to come from that. The art topics are going to come from that, and we're going to say, because now we realize we like this methodology, well, they should know that there's a part of the service that starts with the Baruch Hu and it ends with the Nichamocha or the Hashkivenu or whatever it is, because we want, you know, we're still experimenting. But at the end of the day, if they're doing whatever prayer we're doing, I'm using it as an occasion at this point to help them discover and cultivate their voice.
Got it. Thank you. I
Sure.
That's very helpful to me, you know, in designing designing curriculum or unit plans. Is like, what should I focus on? And then, you know, then you're saying the prayers come as a learning activity, or the creative writing is a learning activity. But, you know, as a rabbi, you would know so much more about that than I would. You know, what is it that you want to instill or cultivate in those learners, and what are the right questions to ask when you're designing the curriculum? So, but thank you. That's very helpful, Rabbi. Thank you.
Sure, of course. I mean, potentially I would know more, but a lot of this stuff is hashed out in conversation. There are people who are implementing this kind of program that have never led tefillah before, Israeli, some of our Hebrew teachers, things like that, because they see how exciting it is and they want to be a part of it. So one of the things we're doing, we do stories. So we say, okay, the prayers Aleinu, a Hebrew teacher who is a children's author, we want you to pick non-Jewish stories that illustrate some aspect of Aleinu. Well, that's a huge challenge for her. And so she found this great story about, I don't remember what it was, but in order to do that, I always say, let's ground ourselves in the Siddur if we can. So if we're trying to figure out what question or what creative writing prompt I'm going to draw from Aleinu, and maybe we'll end here, and she's trying to figure out what secular story she's going to use to illustrate some aspect of Aleinu, and someone else is trying to figure out a way to do whatever. We'd love to have that text in front of us and just say, like, what's it saying? So that way someone can't say, we can't just abuse the text, and we don't also go right to our first thing. Like my first thing with Aleinu is Tikkun Olam, because that's where the idea, let's aken olam b'malchut shaddai. But someone else might say, well, it's really about Asher Bachar Banu, or someone else, you've chosen us. Or someone else might say it's about Bayom Hahu Yehieh Adonai Echad. One day it's about, God being one. But putting the text there makes it a more democratic activity and keeps people real and authentic and leads to greater creativity.
Got it.
Which comes to Stephanie in the question of, like, you can't have that exciting of a conversation about Aleinu if you don't have some sense of Aleinu,
right.
So so the kids who are doing these creative writings aren't yet in a position where they could be the ones who are creating the assignments. Maybe, Michael, maybe that's the goal. One day, rabbi or not, they are comfortable enough that they can open up a Siddur and they can say, I want to give myself a freelance writing assignment on the basis of whatever page I've opened to right now. I know enough to know, like, oh, I've opened to the Yom HaAtzmaut liturgy, or to the Festival Kiddush or something, like they could do that and they could say, well, that doesn't really make sense right now because it's Hanukkah. And so maybe I actually want to get my inspiration from Hanukkah. So I'm going to open to the, something like that. Maybe that is the goal, that eventually they've realized that it's so nourishing to be creatively engaged in your voice with your Jewish tradition, that they then have the ability to kind of self-administer these sorts of activities. Jared?
This is great. We got another question for Stephanie, a response?
Great.
My dog's barking up. I'll be right back.
Stephanie, you get the last comment or question.
So I guess based on your interactions with colleagues, do you see this happening, this kind of creativity? I see a lot in the Reform movement, and our newer prayer book, it's not so new anymore, and our new Machzor are all based on this kind of creativity, right, of understanding the prayers, not necessarily, you need to know their literal translation, right, but what do they mean in our hearts? Is this happening also in sector schools, in community schools, that are
Here's what I would say. I mean,
Orthodox,
it's a good question. I would say I hope so. I think the only perspective that I would add is I know it doesn't happen in everyday school just because people haven't yet made the conceptual turn. Like, we've gotten this far in the Reform movement as to say we want creative voices in our prayer book, but we haven't gotten as far as to say, and those creative voices are, children or laity. What we have in the Iyunim and in the creative stuff in our Siddurim are famous Israeli poets and rabbis and philosophers, and we haven't yet realized that we could easily replace every single Heschel quote with a Sophie quote. I'm not saying that we should, but that's the move that we haven't made yet. So people think in the Jewish day school environment there must be tremendous attending to the spiritual life of children, and it's just not the case, because it's a subtle thing. And we continue to be a part of a society that is anxious for tangibles, and the spirit is inherently intangible unless you coax it out with a pen and paper. And so I hope it's happening more. I don't think that there's anything about me that is so singularly unique or insightful that like this is proprietary, but I do think that my passion and my prioritizing of this is something that makes the Davis Academy experience distinctive in this area. Like I want to be able to say, I work at a Jewish day school and spiritual development happens there. I think unfortunately people assume that it happens when I think religious socialization happens in a Jewish day school, kind of inherently and necessarily, but the spiritual piece doesn't always. Yeah, but it will. You can't steer it down. I'm happy to chat with any of you guys, you know, anytime. We're colleagues. We're all connected somehow. So, Jared, hopefully I have done right by you because that's important to me. And and I'm around.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for joining us. This really shared some interesting ideas. I know it's going to inform, you know, our discussions and our learning over, you know, the next few weeks as the course continues. One of the assignments, which I haven't told the students much about, but they're going to be interviewing a child, sort of write up a reflection on speaking to a child about their spiritual ideas. So I think, you know,
that's awesome.
We're all going to be carrying what, you know, your ideas that you shared with us. I'm sure are going to be really helpful for that assignment.
That's great.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, guys, take care. Michael, maybe any of our paths will cross somewhere. So we will meet again, is what I would say for now. Bye, guys. Have a great afternoon, evening. Bye-bye.
Bye, Mike. Good day.